Hello, Dr. Hanspeter. Welcome to the CEIS20 Podcast. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Hanspeter Kriesi is an associate researcher at the Department of Political Science at the University of Zurich, Switzerland. Previously, he was a professor at the EY in Florence and at the Universities of Amsterdam, Geneva, and Zurich. For the last 6 years, he has collaborated with colleagues from the EY, the LSE, and the University of Milan on the ERC Synergy project, examining the impact of recent multiple crises on the resilience of the European Union. We'd like to begin with our first question, which is: who are you? What do you do? And where?
It's a very broad question. I could answer it briefly or in a long way. I have been a professor from 1984 until last year in the places you mentioned, in political science. But I have studied sociology, actually. And I have a doctorate in sociology and Habilitation in the German-type university system, also in political sociology. I'm Swiss, but I have traveled, as you mentioned, and I have had many students. In Geneva, for example, we had 300 students in the classroom. In Zurich, 200 or 150. I had a lot of doctoral students. I had almost 100 doctoral students in my career, especially at the UI. I had a lot of doctoral students from all over Europe. So I'm mainly an academic, and I have passed all my life in different universities.
And what is the focus of your research?
The focus of my research has shifted. I mean, originally, in my habilitation, I studied the Swiss political elite. And then I studied social movements. For many years, I was in Amsterdam. I was a professor for social movements. And then in Geneva, I became a professor in comparative politics and Swiss politics. So I studied after the movements, political parties, electoral behavior, political behavior more generally, always in a comparative perspective, but in Europe. And then I moved to Zurich, and where I still was a professor in comparative politics. And from there to the UI, as you mentioned. And in the UI, we first studied political conflicts in the Great Recession in Europe. And that was the first ERC project. And the second ERC project that you mentioned was about crises, how Europe managed the series of crises, the Great Recession, the Eurozone crisis, the refugee crisis, Brexit, the COVID crisis, and then the Ukraine war. There are other crises. For example, the colleagues in Amsterdam, in Milano, they studied the social crisis, what they call the social crisis in Europe.
And how is your research interdisciplinary?
That's a good question. The last project was a so-called Synergy project, which is supposed to be interdisciplinary. Now, we were three principal investigators who together got this project, but we were all three political scientists, but not from the same sub-discipline. So I was more, as I said, a comparative politics person and a political behavior person. the Waltraud Schelkle, she was a political economist, very close to economists. And Maurizio Ferreira, he was a European specialist and a social policy specialist. So we were from different parts of political science, and in that sense, our work was interdisciplinary. It was, I mean, you could say we are all political scientists, we are relatively close, but it proved to be difficult even if we were all political scientists. Like Maurizio, he was much more policy-oriented. I was much more politics-oriented. He was, and Waltraud, they were much more qualitative in methods, and I was more quantitative in methods. So, I mean, we experienced in our research team the difficulties of interdisciplinary research.
So the last question is, do you have any perspectives on the present and the future that you would like to share with us in the context of your research?
I mean, I just talked about populism, and I talked about the relationship between populism and what I call a new cleavage in Europe. That is the new master conflict, which I identify as the conflict between cosmopolitans and nationalists, or you could also say between universalistic values and more particularistic, nationalist, traditionalist values. Now, the radical right, the populist radical right, on the one hand, and the Greens on the other hand, are new challenger parties that articulate this conflict. And what I was saying is that this conflict is restructuring the European party systems. And in the process of this restructuring, these new challenger parties are being embedded into the party system and become integral parts of the party system. And as they become integral parts of the restructured party system, they will be moderating and they will lose their populist character. So I argued that this new conflict is shaping the future of European party systems, first in the northwest of Europe, but then also in the east of Europe and in countries like Portugal in the south of Europe. We discussed the case of Portugal because you have this Chega party that has been coming up, and my argument was that Portugal is following the lead of other party systems in other countries and is becoming ever more structured like other party systems.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.